welcome everyone to this presentation. I'm actually sharing today a few knowledge and also analysis. In a way, we're not going to go quantitative today too much, at least. We're going to stick to a quite high level, but I'm analyzing this EU water resilience strategy. I have this title, which poses the question, long on policy, short on time. And I anticipate if you expect a very, let's say, clear answer on this, well, you'll not get it. There's going to be something more elaborated on many dimensions, and we'll try to unpack this question in the different dimensions that a strategy at the European level requires. It's a bit of a different lecture, I have to say, than what I give normally. And this comes out basically of first of all, the initiative of the EU to launch this water resilience strategy. We'll see later when this happened and so on, but basically it's very recent. And a few events that followed on that. And, you know, typically I normally teach on technical content that relates to data science, AI, and water. And today we stick to more of a policy level. We'll see later why this is happening, basically. Just a quick overview. I think there was already a very rich introduction of my background and myself. I want to introduce also shortly our research lab, the Digital Water Systems Lab at U Berlin. This follows basically the foundation of the Smart Water Networks lab. That was our former name between 2018 and November last year. Then we transitioned to this Digital Water Systems Lab. So a bit broader concept, but still in between of data, AI, and water. And you see here the names of the people that actually I enjoy working with every day. We have people in Berlin. We have several collaborations worldwide. And generally, you know, there's multiple aspects of water that we look at. Now, this is going to be in the next slide. The reason why I'm introducing already the research lab before going into the actual content of today's presentation is that, you know, when we work on water, I myself, an environmental engineer, then moved to computer science, and now I'm in mechanical engineering. Basically, we realized that there's a lot of different dimensions, disciplines, and complexities that come to surface. And therefore, also solutions cannot generally be just very trivial or simple, just look at one aspect of these complex systems. And this is really tightened into the presentation topic for today. We're also part of the Einstein Center, as it was said, and I think this is already giving an idea of, let's say, how water and other topics that now are basically linked to these global challenges. Today we're talking about the challenge of water. This fits this lecture series that's more broadly on climate. Certainly there's also other global challenges related to, for instance, health, related to societal change and so on. So the Einstein Center, in that sense, is actually a hub in Berlin where we develop interdisciplinary digitalization-based research. So we develop digital approaches to try find solutions for these problems. And this is the Robert Koch Forum. This is basically the headquarters of the Einstein Center. It's in the center of Berlin. And together with the different universities, TU Berlin, of course, being one of them in this initiative, the Einstein Center has this goal to basically produce really policy and societally relevant research. So the research doesn't end with the papers we write, with our publications, but actually, hopefully, it creates an impact where this goes into informing policymaking, where this goes into creating awareness or informing our societies as well, and fostering exchange. Now, in this respect, our research is focused mostly on these four topics that you see here: data-driven tools for urban critical water infrastructure, planning and management, behavioral models in coupled human-environment systems, digitalization of water utilities, and finally, interconnected critical urban infrastructure systems and the urban metabolisms. So you see already from this list that when it comes to water, so here we are already restricting quite a lot the scope of our investigation. You know, we started from, in general, water and digitalization, the Einstein Center. Now we go a bit already more specific into some specific topics. Still, you see that water has many dimensions. There's certainly the dimension of infrastructure, the way we basically handle water and transport it and make it basically safely come into our homes is with infrastructure, of course. And in our group, we look at data and how data-driven methods can actually help us plan and manage our water infrastructure better. However, as you see from the other different points here, the second to fourth points, you understand that, of course, it's not just about the infrastructure. Humans are certainly linked and cannot be really separated from water. We use water. We also somehow get influenced by water in some way. Think about when you're just, going out and it's raining, then of course this is influencing your habits. Maybe you go out, the street is flooded, then of course this is having an effect on you, right? And there's several actors like water utilities that are actually managing this very precious resource. And one way that we can assist is via these digital tools. Later on, I'll present a couple of approaches we've developed as well. And finally, the last point says that water is not alone. Water is connected particularly within the urban metabolism, which are all these resource exchange and consumption in a city. All these mechanisms that regulate that. Water is related to energy. We need water for energy, and also we need energy to transport water, for instance. Water can be linked to transportation systems. Again, going back to the example of floods, when the streets are flooded, of course, also our transportation systems are affected. So this gives already, I guess, the idea that when it comes to water, we have to care about many dimensions. And so also for those that need to develop the policies, this complexity should be taken into account. Finally, and this brings us then to today's topic, we often talk when we present our research about policy relevant research. As I said earlier already, also with the Einstein Center, we have this mission of creating an impact with our research. And generally what we say is that we want to provide policy relevant research or policy relevant recommendations, which means we hope and we try to actually make recommendations out of our research that can be useful for those that need to take decisions, policymakers, decision makers, municipalities. In the case of water, of course, municipalities, water utilities are the main ones in this decision-making role. And this is where basically today I try to give this presentation, which, as I said, is a bit different from the usual ones I give. Today, I'm not sticking too much to a technical content, but I'm analyzing a policy, this EU water resilience strategy, and giving you an idea through different steps of which priorities are there, which actions can be taken to actually achieve some water-related goals. Give a couple of examples that, of course, relate more to the technical content that we also develop, and possibly try to answer this question that was in the title. As I said, I'll try to. There's going to be more, I guess, points for further discussion rather than a very quick or concise answer. All right, I think now we're set more or less with the sort of all the setting and background to tackle this lecture. And before continuing with it, I stop sharing and I have a couple of questions for the participants. There's a Mentimeter that was organized and it's actually already here in the chat. So you find the link in the chat. I would really ask everyone to now click on the link, or there's also the QR code on screen. And I have two quick questions. I wouldn't say simple questions, but rather quick ones. And I anticipate I'm not going to provide an answer right now. The answer will come a little bit later, but I really want to hear your ideas. I see already some people are replying here. On the first question, when you hear water resilience in Europe, what's the first problem that comes to mind to you?
Vielleicht noch ein kurzer Hinweis, wenn jetzt jemand sich im Englischen nicht so sicher fühlt, kann natürlich auch gerne auf Deutsch ein Stichwort beigefügt werden oder mehrere.
Ah ja, natürlich. Ich habe das vergessen, Entschuldigung. Okay.
Das ist ja
see
meine
heat and
Aufgabe.
drought. I see drought and heat, particularly these days. I think heat is, yes, I see that. All right, we can wait for some more answers. I think there's more people logged into the Menti. Some are still answering. It's already interesting to see how this word cloud is shaping, because there's certainly three things that are strongly connected: heat scarcity and drought, that relate more to the water availability and climate. And there's also this AI, and somebody, I think it was a bit smaller, data center. So there's something coming up about technology. Scarcity. Waterborne diseases. Oh, that's interesting. That's also... Maybe we can wait for one or two more answers. And I think already here we're getting a clear, I would say, ideas of which priorities are in this crowd. So there's something related to heat, drought, scarcity, low groundwater, probably also connected to that. There's something about technology with AI and data center. And there's something about water use, pollution, and something about, also, we saw it before, health and waterborne diseases. Interesting. All right, I'll save it for later. And I think many of these things will come up in the presentation. We can maybe jump to the next question. Since one of the aspects was about technology, okay, now I want to understand whether you know how many water-related or water technology-related patents come from Europe. I've discovered that quite recently, I have to say. So despite working in this field for quite some time, I didn't know the exact number, and that's quite interesting. All right, I see. Many are replying. So the majority so far is replying 25%, some 40%, a few less, 60%. Nobody's replying, around 10%. Oh, we got one now, but still quite limited. So many of you are quite optimistic that more than, or at least 1/4 of international water-related patents are from Europe. All right, maybe we give 30 seconds more for others to reply. Seems like there's a majority of 25%, and some very optimistic ones around 60%. All right, I see answers are still coming in. Maybe we'll wait for a couple more. And I think now probably the majority will not change. So basically, we save it for later. Remember, you said, many of you said 25% is around the amount of international water-related technology patents that come from Europe. We'll see that later. On that one, I have a number in my presentation later. So now let me just basically go back to my presentation here, and we'll pick it up from where we left.
And please remember that you can put some questions into TweetBack.
I'll be happy to answer the best way I can later. All right. So from policy relevant research to the EU water resilience strategy. So now we actually go in the core of this presentation, and I'll introduce this water resilience strategy. Before getting particularly into that, I need to provide a little bit of more background, where this is coming from actually, and what happened in the world, let's say, in terms of sustainability initiatives before that strategy, and also to motivate that strategy. I guess many of you will be familiar with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that were basically adopted by all UN member states back in 2015. So it's more than 10 years ago, and there's a deadline approaching for these SDGs, in short, to be basically achieved in 2030. And so with this deadline approaching, of course, the attention is into how far we are in their achievement, in the development of solutions to actually achieve this 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Water is actually one of them. So water is prominent when it comes to sustainability initiatives globally. It comes with this SDG number 6, which is actually named Clean Water and Sanitation. And on the infographic on the left, which is taken from UN Water, you see with different color codes, different dimensions of water, which are prioritized in this sustainability agenda. Now, we don't have time to read all the numbers and all the different definitions, but I would like to put a little bit of attention on these different dimensions. There's a first one, 6.1.1, which is drinking water. First priority is to provide people with water that they can drink. And water comes also with services for sanitation and hygiene, which are priorities in the second level. You see here with the yellow color. And then, of course, water is not just about drinking, it's also about the wastewater we produce. It's about the environment, so the water quality. So you see that other dimensions here, wastewater, water quality. Then going down, we have water usage and efficiency, which leads also to concern into water-stressed areas. And finally, the box is a bit more open in the final rows here, where you have integrated water resource management, transboundary cooperation, advocating for cooperations across borders, ecosystems, international cooperation, also linked to this transboundary cooperation, and participation. So you see there's a series of priorities which are globally defined and accepted by the UN nations, UN member states, to actually improve the way we manage water with the final goal of providing, ideally, everyone with clean water and sanitation. Now, one would wonder how we're going actually with these SDG, how we're doing in Europe. And in general, if you look at it, while water is generally considered quite a safe resource in Europe, I guess all of us basically, whenever we open the tap, we know we're going to get water out of it, and this water is going to be safe for our usage and for drinking. Well, if you look at this Eurostat SDG progress tracker, this is basically showing how we're doing in Europe with this SDG number 6. And if you look at this color bar, which goes from green to red, where green is progress, we're making progress towards the achievement of these SDGs by 2030. And red means we're moving away from it. Well, we are in the orange area. So already in Europe, there's a little bit of a warning, some alarming sign that we're not doing maybe so well with these SDG. And if we look more in detail about the different dimensions here on the right-hand side, generally we can put now the focus on the arrows that go that point towards the bottom of the slide. So we see here under water scarcity, there's 2 of them. And also here in water quality, there's pesticides in rivers and phosphates in rivers. So there's quite some concerns that some dimensions, particularly when it comes to water scarcity and water quality, well, we're doing something which is moving us further from the achievement of the SDG by 2030. So whereas in Europe, probably we started from a better baseline than other parts of the world for the achievement of this SDG 6, well, it seems that there's some concerns about some dimensions actually moving in a worse direction than actually in the desired direction to achieve these SDGs. So already this global agenda is motivating the focus on making our practices, infrastructure, and ways to manage and plan for water resources better. Now, of course, everything becomes more evident when you see there's some scarcity. I'd like to mention Benjamin Franklin and quote his sentence, "When the well's dry, we know the worth of water." I guess this is particularly true for water, in fact, because whenever water comes out of our tap, we don't really question whether there's going to be any problem with water. I think awareness may be a bit low, and we just give for granted that we get water out of the tap. More recently, I think also in contexts where we have continuous systems, continuous and safe supply of water, the general awareness and concerns about water becoming either too low with scarcity, too much, maybe with floods, or too dirty with concerns of water quality, is actually raising our attention to that. And so basically, the interplay between these factors, too little, too much, or too dirty, actually also motivated the EU water resilience strategy. So going from the global SDGs now to a more European context with this water resilience strategy, we can get in the core content of these EU water resilience strategies. See here just a screenshot of the cover page of this communication from the Commission to all these institutions, the European Parliament, the Council, the European Economic and Social Committee, and the Committee of the Regions. This is basically a document that was released a bit more than a year from now. You see here, 4th of June 2025. So it was roughly 1 year ago, after a call for evidence. And the European Commission basically released this document, which is open. Actually, you should have also received the link to get access to it. It's available in several languages. And it's a relative short one. It's about 28 pages plus a lot of footnotes with references. And basically, these 28 pages define a European-wide strategy for water resilience. This will basically is going to be a very strategic and important document driving actions which are going to be taken in European countries to actually tackle the different challenges that we have related to water in Europe nowadays. And mostly they will span 3 key objectives. The first one, restoring and protecting the water cycle. The second one is building a water smart economy. And the third one is ensuring access to clean and affordable water for all. So you see that in general, there's quite some overlap with these keywords and objectives and indicators that I've mentioned earlier for the SDGs. So of course, there's a synergy between these global policies and more, in this case, a continental policy. And also, you can see already from this very short list of objectives that this complexity that I mentioned at the very beginning, the fact that we have a water cycle, which is not just the water supply, for instance, but there's also wastewater, rainfall, and so on, needs to be taken into account. The fact that water is not alone, water is now part of our society, of our economy, so we can also build a water smart economy. And the third one, of course, highlighting the priority to basically achieve a clean and affordable access to water for all. So there's also the economic aspect, not just of being able to get access to water, but also to financially being able to afford the water that we need. Now, let me go a bit more in depth into how each of these objectives is then developed in the strategy. And I'm going to provide just some highlights. I invite, of course, all of you to check the document or ask questions later on. Basically related to the first one, restoring and protecting the water cycle, the direction of this strategy is to go from source to sea. So actually, water in all its phases, not just as individual compartments, but as a whole process, as a whole cycle. And there's an emphasis on water smart practices, so this technological aspect as well, and green infrastructure. This is motivated by several factors. You see 2 highlighted here from a screenshot from the document. For instance, in 2021, only less than 40% of the EU's surface water had good ecological status, and only 26.8% a good chemical status. This is basically less than half. Right? So this is quite alarming. This is saying that we are already facing a lot of challenges. It's not about the future. It's not about things that will come, but it's actually a reality that we're facing now. And a big concern in that, both for the causes it has on water resources and also our health, as well as the economic impacts that it can have, is about this PFAS and persistent pollutants, which you see basically cause health impacts estimated in the order of billions of euros annually. So all these aspects of the water cycle, the economy, our society are very much connected into this, with some quite alarming numbers here. The second one is building a water smart economy. Also here, I provide a couple of data that motivate this. And in particular, this is mostly the first line, particularly targeting water conservation and efficiency. And there's a target. The EU should aim to enhance water efficiency by at least 10% by 2030. So basically 5 years from the release of this strategy, the goal is to release to use less water and reduce water consumption by 10%. So the target here is to build a water smart economy where water conservation and efficiency and the reduction of water losses are the priority. One challenge in that, which is represented by the next highlight here below, is that often we don't necessarily know how much water is used. We don't necessarily have a good monitoring system. You see, for instance, here that it says that 81% of the total water consumption goes to users that abstract water directly at the source using private systems. So there's often not really a good monitoring system. So in order to reduce how much we use, of course, we would need to first understand how much is effectively used and lost in some cases. The third objective, which is ensuring access to clean and affordable water for all, comes actually with these two dimensions of awareness and sound water pricing. So the highlight is not just about providing water to people in a clean and a safe way, but also to make it affordable. And also this focus on international partnership and cooperation. This is very much linked to also these dimensions of the SDGs. And here you would see some percentages that may still resemble quite low, but actually I think many of you probably expected a 0 to be put in these two numbers, where 1.5 is the percentage of EU population that lives without basic sanitary facilities, and 4% of European people lack proper access to safe drinking water. So I think the wish would be really to have these two numbers going to 0. So even though there's in percentage some small numbers, they're quite significant at the European level, basically. Now, the strategy doesn't stop with objectives. There's defined areas of action, which basically tell us where we can act in order to achieve these objectives. And 5 dimensions are really highlighted in this strategy, in the document. The first one is governance and implementation. The second one is investment and infrastructure. The third one is digitalization and AI. The fourth, research and innovation. And last but not least, security and preparedness. If you look at this without knowing that these are now specific areas of action for water resilience in the EU, I think they could regard many other sectors. In many sectors, we now need better governance and implementation. We need integration of new investment schemes and digital technology and the role of research. And of course, particularly in the last years, with also in general, the global context, more attention to security and preparedness, not just when it comes, for instance, to physical infrastructure, but also to all our cyber processes, for instance, right? And preparedness to extremes as well. So these are quite, I would say, transferable areas of action, which in this case become very relevant for water. All in all, this is saying that we should invest in using and developing better technology and exploiting technologies that we have. We should value the research that is currently occurring in water resources planning and management. We need to change our way of managing the resource in the dimensions of governance, economy, and the way we get prepared and guarantee security. So these are quite broad areas and often very much interlinked and overlapping, basically, that are indicated as priorities for action here. I'll be happy to provide a couple of examples later, more in practice of what can be done. The whole process of the EU Water Resilience Strategy doesn't stop with the objectives and the areas of action, but actually there's also a way to track the progress that we're doing, differently from other initiatives like, for instance, the SDGs, which have this deadline on 2030, and we know already that some of them will not be achieved as desired at the beginning by 2030. The deadline here is a bit dependent on the type of action. And there's a tool which is called the Water Resilience Strategy Action Tracker. You see also the link in the slide here on the bottom, which lists more than 50 concrete actions which are listed by the European Commission as priorities or sort of KPIs, key performance indicators, that one can check in order to understand whether this strategy has been achieved. I have to say, and I'll be happy to elaborate also later in the Q&A, there's been a bit of a mixed feedback in different groups about these KPIs and different actions. Normally they come in this format that you see here. There's a recommendation, for instance, on what needs to be done. In this case is the water efficiency first principle, which basically says that before increasing water supply, we should prefer interventions that basically make current usage more efficient. So that's why it's called water efficiency first principle. It is a principle, so it's not a law here. And here you can see the status, the timeline, where the basically timeline for each action is defined. That's the parameter that I said can change depending on the type of action. A little bit of a summary and then some updates and relevant information. So this is all public. If you click on the link there on the slide, you get access to a similar description for all of these more than 50 different types of actions that are set up as practical actions in these 5 areas of action and these 3 main objectives of the water resilience strategy. Now, the water resilience strategy is a strategy itself. It's not a law, meaning that it's mostly high level in defining the priorities for intervention in water, for investment in water. It's identifying the problems and these areas of action. But in general, it relates to a lot of regulations that have been developed in the last years in Europe. So it basically emphasized the urge to act on our water systems if we want them to be resilient and basically be able to serve our needs in the future while accounting for climate and societal and technological change. But maybe one good news here, which also relates to the title long-term policy, is that we're not starting from scratch. As I said, this is a strategy, but this comes after more than 20 years of water policy. I'm summarizing here in the slide and listing some of the main water-related directives at the European level. It's not a comprehensive list. I just selected a few of the main ones, which are also quite connected over time, to give you a little bit of a feeling of what happened during the last 20 years, more than 20 years, actually. And I think the main, the starting point, which is still extremely relevant, is this Water Framework Directive from the year 2000. Which is actually still, I would say, the most relevant reference when it comes to European regulations on water. There's a lot of things entailed in that. One, I think, that I would really like to mention here was this attention to be put on water systems not as administrative systems. So the administrative boundaries that we have normally do not match the water boundaries, the basin boundaries, for instance. And so we need to treat water bodies according to these boundaries, not according to our boundaries, which of course creates some complications when it comes to transboundary river basins, so as an example, and so on and so forth. All the other directives that you see here, we have the Flood Management Directive from 2007, the Drinking Water Directive in 2020, Nature Restoration Regulation in 2024, and in the same year also a recast of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, focus on more specialized parts, one on climate extremes, floods particularly, for the Flood Management Directive. The Drinking Water Directive sets some targets and obligations also, for instance, for water utilities to report more and better about water losses, some particular water utilities, typically the biggest ones. And then you have this nature restoration and the directive on urban wastewater treatment, which is very much focused also, on water quality aspects. So the water resilience strategy is not starting from scratch. It's not an initiative that comes out of nowhere and just from this urge of, we need to do something about water because we're seeing the problems that climate and water extremes, floods and droughts are causing. And so we need to do something. Well, no, this is the outcome of more than 20 years of water policy. So Europe, in this sense, has worked over the last 20 years on developing a very rich regulation on the different aspects of water. Is this enough to guarantee water resilience? Well, apparently not, because of course there's also a little bit of a gap between the policy and the implementation, and accounting for the heterogeneity of the European countries as well. So the main goal of this water resilience strategy is really to set some urge on which priorities need to be tackled, and puts the emphasis on basically really adopting these regulations from the last 20 years. And of course, can also drive investments in technology, in solutions, and so on. So it's basically a higher level type of regulation that links all these different past regulations and directives in a common framework. A nice signal of how this also came to life is basically coming also from this 2021 other strategy from the EU, which is an adaptation to climate change. So this is more broadly on climate, but if you see some of the highlights here, I'm going to do it quite quickly. Water was already prominent in that. So there is an example of droughts. So water scarcity is certainly one of the main drivers of all these interventions. We need to better understand the interdependencies between climate change, ecosystems, and the service they deliver. Water supply, for instance, recreation from water bodies, and so on, being some of them. And then there's these 2 points that say ensuring the fresh water is available in a sustainable manner is fundamental for climate resilience, and we need to sharply reduce water usage. So basically, these aspects of efficiency, water consumption reduction, and the water bodies being a part of basically our environment, our climate system as well, was already prioritized also in other strategies. So this strategy itself is not coming neither from scratch nor in isolation. Now, I think this gives a bit of an overview of what this is about. And I think here we can maybe slow down and take a few seconds just to reflect what we learned so far, which is basically that, well, the EU is putting some urge on water challenges and created this strategy as a framework for identifying priorities. And I've given also a couple of high-level examples of which areas of intervention can basically be prioritized. Now, in this second part, and then the final part of this presentation, I'd like to provide maybe a couple of examples that relate to research and come back to this concept of policy relevant insights. As I said at the beginning, our mission is to create research which doesn't end with just some published results, but also hopefully creates an impact and is useful for decision makers and citizens. And so here I'm giving a couple of examples of 2 topics that are strongly connected to also what we do, and basically identify how research and technology can really help achieve the goals of this strategy. I'll be also quite critical in that respect. So I'm giving both the shiny aspects of it, but also a little bit of what can be improved. And if you remember, one of the priorities, particularly in this objective number 2 of creating a water smart economy in Europe, is about water losses. One clear goal was to reduce water losses in this strategy. And now I'm not sure whether you know, but basically in Europe, about 25%, that's an average, of the water that is supplied in our water networks then is lost due to leakages. And of course, it is not homogeneous across European countries. If you look at the ranges between 8 and 57%, which is quite alarming. 57% means that more than half of the water that's extracted, treated, and supplied is then lost on the way. So it's it's a waste of water, but also waste of money and effort. And certainly we have room for improvement in this. Well, there's several technologies that can actually help reduce water losses. Of course, from sensors to algorithms, AI-based technologies at last as well, and so on. And in one of our projects, which is called IOLE, which stands for Intelligent Online Leakage Detection, actually, we just completed this project. We tried to actually combine best practices, meaning both model-based and data-driven leakage detection algorithms. Some use a hydraulic model, some just use some data. These are the 2 main categories. And we combined them in such a way that we could translate research products into something useful for utilities. So our goal was to achieve the 3 goals of creating an integrated technology, which could basically integrate more than one type of algorithm. A robust technology that can be used under different types of cases, for instance, when there's data gaps or maybe small utilities having less data and lower quality models than big ones, for instance, in some cases, and so on. And particularly human-centered. And on this final aspect, I would like really to put an emphasis. So our goal was not just to develop the next best leakage detection algorithm, there's several out there, but was trying to understand how we can make these technologies more human-centered, which means how they can be more easily adopted by water utilities. And we asked water utilities directly. We were running an online survey during the project where we interviewed 19 utilities, most of them being in Europe, so that fits also, I'd say, the context of this lecture. And with you see here their reported NRW, which stands for non-revenue water, is basically water losses. The interviewed utilities had on average 12% of water losses. Between basically 4.25%, this is the lower 25th percentile, which means that 25% of these utilities had very low water losses. Actually, if you remember the European average of 25% here, we're certainly below that. But still, some achieved the maximum of 40%. So even if the sample is relatively small, we have a good representation of different cases. And quite interestingly, what we found was only partly about the technology. So what we found is that there's a bit of a gap between ambition and adoption barriers when it comes to digital technology. Let me guide you through these. So basically 17 out of 19 of these utilities said that they're going to invest in water loss management and technology in the next 5 years. Good news. There's a high ambition to adopt best practices and better technology to basically reduce water losses. And there's a willingness to invest in these technologies in the next 5 years. That's exactly the timeline of the water resilience strategy, if you remember, for many actions. Still, there's some challenges and wishes. And if you look at the challenges, they're about inadequate data, high costs, lack of skilled personnel, limited access to technology. So it's not about just the cost of technology. There's high cost mentioned there, but often is about skills of workers that need them to use that technology. So workers in water utilities and in water agencies and so on need to have the right skill set to actually also adopt the latest technologies, AI on top of this, for instance. And some wishes. And if you look at the wishes, which is basically the aspects they would wish to see in future technologies to be more easily adopted, well, you see that among them, there's user-friendly tools, low maintenance, and others that relate more to the technological aspects like accuracy, cost effectiveness, and low maintenance, prediction capabilities. So in all of these, you see that there's some ambition, but also some barriers that prevent a wide adoption of these. And many of them relate, in fact, to more the human factor rather than the technological factor. We have already a lot of technology in the water sector. The problem is often adoption. That was a clear message from the very first Water Resilience Forum that was organized last December in Brussels as one of the flagship initiatives within the water resilience strategy. So every 2 years, this is going to be organized. And I had the pleasure and luck to actually attend the first one within a panel that was in fact looking at technology adoption. And the clear message was, we have a lot of technology in the water sector, but adoption levels are often very low. This was confirmed also by one of our previous studies that you see here, where here we show with different icons, different types of technologies that can and are adopted in the water sector. And each sub box basically relates to a subsector of the water cycle. Now, this is not so relevant here. What you see going left to right is basically how advanced the adoption of a technology is. So the ones that are more on the right-hand side are widely adopted, the other ones are a bit less. And you see basically what you take away from just a quick look on this is that there's a heterogeneous landscape. There's many technologies. but they're developed at different steps, at different pace, and depending on which subsectors of the water domain we look at, then some are a bit under development still or at the early stages. So this is confirming that the water sector is going through a process of digitalization, but this is somehow incremental, not necessarily disruptive as in other technological sectors, and it goes step by step. And while the technology is there, adoption is in fact a challenge. Now, the second example, which will bring me also to the conclusions of this lecture, is about water conservation. You remember that this water smart economy, and still building on that goal, was not just about identifying losses, but it was also about prioritizing water efficiency. And this came also with this complementary principle of water efficiency first. Well, there's been a study, I read it with interest, that was commissioned by this WE Data Europe, and then it was executed by Vito, which basically looks into how much water we can save by using smart meters. So better water metering in the residential sector particularly. And one of their main claim is actually that we can save up to 25% of water by improving metering systems and possibly combining this with awareness programs and so on. So they combine data from the analysis, they say, literature and industry insights quantify water metering saving up to 25%. Interestingly, they found an average of 8%, which is also what we found in a previous study where basically we installed smart meters and looked at behavior change over the span of 2 years. That's what we called already long-term. And so we looked into how people changed their water consumption habits in 2 years after having a smart digital meter installed in their house and an awareness program where we were communicating digitally feedback on their water consumption and how to improve that. So we observed certainly some improvements in water conservation and efficiency, which are in line with the other study I just mentioned. However, one interesting aspect that we also mentioned here is that the behavioral response is heterogeneous. We're individuals, we have different preferences, interests, attitudes, and our way of using water can be quite different. So also when we looked into how different groups save or didn't save water in our experiment, we see that what we called water savers, you see here over the span of 4 years, many had a decreasing trend in water consumption. Well, about 10% of our sample went back to the original behavior after some initial saving, and some other really did not decrease their consumption. So in all of this, again, technology is there, but technology alone is not the solution. Technology depends on adoption in terms of how much effective it can be, and also on the way we use it or we can benefit from it. And so the behavioral aspect, the human factor, is quite crucial in this, as we can see from these heterogeneous behaviors. So all in all, I think we've seen, a few different aspects of these strategies, and I provided a couple of examples of how technology can help along with its criticalities. Let me go back to the original question now, and I'll try to wrap this up and then open the discussion afterwards. I know that trying to summarize all the complex aspects of water and the complex aspects of a continental-wide strategy in less than 1 hour is a bit of a challenge. So I hope that at least, these key highlights that I've given somehow give you an idea of what's basically coming up with this resilience strategy and basically what we can do. Let me now conclude with a little bit of an analysis of this long-on policy, short-on time. So certainly I can say that my take on this, and here I'm really giving the result of my analysis, basically. I'm not providing any opinion directly from the European Commission, or so I'm not representing any European body in these, of course. We are long on policy. That's been demonstrated by these 20 years and more of policy. Sometimes slow on policy. I think that's also a bit of a stereotype of European countries being good at, starting new regulations, but then having a very slow administrative process and bureaucracy. But also we are short on time. So both of these are somehow true. I'd like to somehow to conclude with some good news anyway, because I think this water resilience strategy maybe is coming a little bit late, knowing that we have already a lot of problems, but it can be really realized, I would say. And the reason for that is that we built on the good news that I have in these final slides. The European Investment Bank in July 2025 committed to increasing investments in water on the amount of 15 billion euros between 2025 and 2027. This is quite a lot of money, I would say. And it's a good sign that, this strategy is not just coming up with intention, but actually also with investments, which are, of course, crucial for its realization. Is this enough? That's where I put the maybe on top. Hard to say, basically, if you consider, for instance, that in 2022 only, drought-related losses amounted to 40 billion euros. So 3 times more or less that amount, right, for one single water problem. Of course, it's a bit of an unfair comparison, but still, this gives an idea of the numbers that are out there. The other good news is that Europe accounts for 40% of all international patents in water-related technology. Remember the Mentimeter question here. 40%. So I think overall, there were some optimistic people here that said 60%, but many said 25%. Actually, Europe is doing better than what you and originally I thought. We have 40% of the share of international water-related technology patents worldwide. Again, technology is there, but there's a mismatch between technology development and adoption. So we have the technology, we have now some new investments, and hopefully more will come. And we don't need to redevelop the regulatory framework. We have already the regulations. So now really, in order to materialize this water resilience strategy, is about making the best out of these investments and hoping that these investments create a momentum in the water smart economy. Really adopting technologies that we have, of course, while going through improvements and further testing, but let's make the best use of the technologies that we have already. And yes, we have the regulations, of course, but we need now really to stick to them and make sure we meet them by the defined times. So hopefully this maybe will translate into, checked and achieved in some years. That's what I had today for this water resilience strategy. I look forward to further discussing this in the question time. And if you have also questions or want to reach out later, here you have my contact.